أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه ونور عرشه أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome to our fourth and last session covering the science of Hadith. I hope everyone's doing well with the current escalating health climate. So thus far we have covered the history of Hadith compilation, Ilm al-Rijal, a branch of Hadith sciences, as well as Ilm al-Diraya very briefly. At the end of last week's sessions, we also delved into the jurisprudence of Hadith and went through some terminology as well as some tools, methodologies, and barriers, and finally some examples or case studies. Inshallah, today we will continue with that. Without further ado, Brother Imran, one last time, thank you for being amongst us this early in the morning.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters, and everyone who's watching this anywhere. Thank you for the recap and the introduction. I had a bit of a rough night. My little youngest daughter had a little bit of a fever. So I'm a little bit tired, but inshallah, I think we'll get through this together, inshallah. So yes, we began with the discussion of fiqh al-hadith last time. And we spoke about, the different tools that are required to understand a narration, the different methodology. No, we didn't cover all the methodologies. We just touched upon some of the methodologies that can be used to weaken or strengthen narrations. And then we also spoke about how certain times you have barriers that can come in your way that can prevent you from understanding the narration correctly. You can misunderstand the narration. So we briefly touched upon some of these and we gave examples. And for today's session, which I hope will not be a very long session, I'll just go through a couple of case studies, very simple case studies, just like one line hadith, just to show the viewers that, it's not just as simple as just reading a narration and saying, oh, well, this is what this means, okay? And, through this case study or these case studies, we'll see that, look, there's a lot of stuff you need to figure out even for yourself as a presumption before you go and interpret a narration and then tell people that this is what this means. So the first case study we want to look at is this very popular narration from the Prophet, peace be upon him, which says that الدنيا سجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر. The dunya is a prison for a believer and it is a paradise for a kafir, for a disbeliever. And when you read that narration, someone, it may come to someone's mind that how can the dunya be the sijn of mu'min and a jannah for a kafir, when we see that there's actually many Muslims in this world who are living a very pleasant, peaceful life. For example, if you don't want to consider the people in the East, you can say, well, there's so many believers living in, I don't know, Canada and Australia, and, it seems to be it's like paradise. Like, what's so bad about life over here? And on the contrary, you may have disbelievers who live in certain parts of the world or in certain areas of the world where it's not paradise for them. They have, they're going through suffering and pain, and, it's basically torture for them. Their life is a hell, basically. So how can we make sense of this sentence? So it's over here that you're going to have to come up with some sort of explanation. And by the way, the presumption here is that this narration is authentic and we've attributed to the Prophet. So there's no question over there at this point. So we now go to the second step, which is, okay, what does this even mean? What does the sentence mean? Because when we look at the reality around us, it doesn't seem to match. Okay, that's where the critique is coming from. It's not matching what we're seeing. Over here, you can, give 5, 6, even 7 different responses and 7 different ways to explain this sentence. One approach would be that this sentence is relative. Okay, it's a relative sentence, meaning that compared to the hereafter, the world of mu'min is basically sijn. Okay, So this world that the believer is living in, it is like a prison compared to what they will get in the hereafter, which is paradise, and they will have their freedom basically over there. And vice versa for a disbeliever, where life over here is Jannah, but compared to the hereafter, when if they'll be in hellfire, then obviously that's going to be hell for them, and the life over here is going to be paradise for them. So it's a relative sentence. Okay, that's how someone would look at it and say, well, this is what this means. A second way to look at it would be that no, it's not a relative sentence. Why are you presuming it's a relative sentence? It literally says ad-dunya sijnul mu'min. It's not saying ad-dunya sijnul mu'min بالنسبة إلى الجحنم وبالنسبة للآخرة. No, it's not getting into those technicalities. It's a very simple statement. And someone can say that, look, when we speak in our conversations, we may say very generic sentences, but what we often mean by these generic sentences is the idea of aghlabiyya, yani basically it's a stereotype. Okay, we're trying to say like most of these people, most of the believers are in it's like life for them is like prison. It's a life of hardship, and most of the disbelievers are in a state of peace and tranquility in this world. Someone may say, well, look, this is how the urf speaks, and this is what this is how we need to understand this sentence. Okay, so that's one other way that someone can explain it. A third way to explain it would be that it's from the perspective of the restrictions that are there on a believer, meaning the believer believes in a religion, and the religion has implemented certain restrictions on them, and they have certain limitations. Okay, they have to pray 5 times a day. Okay, they're not free at that time. There's a lot of things which are haram on them, a lot of things which are wajib on them. For all different times and places, they have schedule, they have obligations, they have duties. For this believer, they don't have such restrictions in this world we're talking about, and so there's nothing to worry about. They move on. And from this perspective, the dunya becomes a sijn for a mu'min because of all the limitations and the restrictions. But for a kafir, it becomes heaven. They don't have any such restrictions in this world. So once again, like you can see, like this is every explanation starts to make sense. Every explanation is making a little bit of sense. Then a fourth explanation would be, and this is, by the way, these are not like we're not making these up. These are like actually scholars have said every single one of these. Different scholars have said and offered these different explanations. That's why we're mentioning them. A fourth explanation would be that this is speaking about a mu'min whose faith is complete and it's like perfect, and a disbeliever whose disbelief is complete. Basically, it's talking about a gradation. So you have this. Let's say you have this, this line, this gradation of a believer. Iman has different darajat. It has different levels. So you have believers at the very lowest level of iman, but then you have believers at a very high level of iman. I think I should do it this way, maybe low and high. And this is speaking about those mu'mineen which are at the highest of levels. Prophets and awliya and these individuals. Life for them is a life of hardship and a life of difficulties. It's like a prison for them. And we have reports as well that says that the messengers were tested the most out of all of the humans. It was the prophets who were tested in the most difficult ways. And then on the contrary, likewise, the disbeliever, one whose disbelief is complete, who's at the sort of like the lowest level of his disbelief, their life is a life of pleasure and stuff in this world. That's also one explanation that they've given. And one final explanation that they've given is that you have to read this sentence. So it says ad-dunya sijnul mu'min. They say read it and understand it as a command for a mu'min, meaning a mu'min has to make the dunya like a prison for himself. Okay, he has to make sure that he is not indulging in the, in the lowly things of the life, of this world, sorry. He has control over his shahawat, he has control over his hawa, and so on. Doesn't make his decisions based on his or her hawa or nafs. This is what the sentence means, ad-dunya sijnul mu'min. Even though it seems like it's a khabar, it's a report that's being given, but they're saying you have to read it as a command tense. And this is, if you're familiar with Arabic and the Hadith, this is common. Like, it's not anything, they're not saying anything, so far-fetched. No, we have many sentences in the Hadith which seem to be an ikhbar, which seem to be a, just a khabar, like a report like this, as dunya sijnul mu'min, but it is actually meant with a, in a command tense. Okay, that's what it means. So you see, like, just one narration, before you go and say, this is what the Prophet meant when he said this, there's so many ways you can actually explain this, and then which one of this is correct, because some of them are actually not correct. They have conflict between them. Okay, like the fifth one is completely in conflict with the previous ones. It's saying it's a command tense. Maybe number 4 is in conflict with the other ones, with the first 3, and so on. Like, there is conflict. It's not that all of them can be reconciled together. There's conflict. So what a scholar would have to do is then bring his evidence to back up his explanation. For example, in the first one that we mentioned, they may bring a narration from Imam Hassan alayhi salam, which says exactly this. It's another famous story that, someone came to Imam Hassan, and Imam Hassan was on a horse, and this person, I think he was a Jew, and he was, poor and stuff, and he quoted this narration himself. The Jewish person quoted this narration to Imam Hassan alayhi salam. He says, this is your grandfather's narration, and look, his narration was wrong. You're the one who's on a horse, and your life seems to be good. Well, I'm the one who's poor. And Imam Hassan says it's a relative sentence. Okay, so someone can bring that as evidence to say that, look, this is why I'm saying this is what it means. But someone may say, no, that narration is weak, and we can't rely on that as evidence. Here, it's the 4th one, for example, and we have evidence that says that the prophets are going to be tested and so on. So, you have to bring an evidence for why you believe that this is what this narration means. So this is, the first slide that we first case study that we looked at. A second case study now, it's looking at some narrations, but it's like a general point that I'll be making in this one. So look, we have sometimes narrations, particularly when it comes to like these akhlaqi type of narrations. Okay, these akhlaqi narrations are usually very, very like, not vague, but it's like, it's almost like they're speaking in so much absolutes that sometimes you end up even seeing conflicts between these absolute traditions. Okay, for example, like one time it says, there's so much condemnation for the dunya, but then somewhere else we have tons of narration which say that you should make sure your dunya is good. So like sometimes when these are reported from the minbar, from the pulpits, the audience may get confused. Like, okay, wait, you just gave a whole lecture, about the problems with the dunya, but here today you're giving me a lecture about, the benefits of the dunya and what we're supposed to do in the dunya and how we're supposed to make sure our dunya is good. Okay, so these. So we have certain narrations like these. So for example, sababul faqr al-israf, the cause of poverty is extravagance. Or for example, salatul layl tubayyid al-wajh. Okay, the night prayers brightens the face, makes your scent pleasant, and brings about sustenance. Someone may say that, look, I did israf yesterday, okay, or I did israf, let's say 2-3 times this past month, and I'm not poor, I'm still perfectly fine. Or someone may say that, look, I prayed the salatul layl, I prayed it yesterday, but my face isn't brightened, and neither is my pleasant odor pleasant, and neither was there an increase in my sustenance. Nothing happened, even though these narrations seem to imply that, yeah, if you do israf, it is the sabab, it is the cause of faqr. Or if you pray salatul layl tubayyidul wajh, Okay, وَتُطَيِّبُ الرِّيحَ, and so on. How do we explain these sort of sentences that seem to be very universal and absolute sentences? That the moment you do israf, that's it, you're gonna have faqr. The moment you pray Salatul Layl, that's it, you're gonna have this result. Once again, over here I'm gonna explain the different presumptions you can come in with to understand narrations. And at the end, by the way, I've referenced my own article from my blog, iqraonline.net. The title of the article is Dealing with Seemingly Contradictory Ethical Verses and Traditions. Okay. It's the whole article is about this. So I've just summarized like these 4 points. If you read the article, it's a lot more in detail and in length. One approach is what the logicians have said. Okay, the mantiqiyun. They say that when you have these general sentences that don't have the word, every. So for example, it doesn't say every instance of extravagance is a cause of faqr. So it doesn't say the word every or all, all Salatul Layl will brighten your face. When you don't have words like these, then they say the sentence is muhmal, meaning even if one of these Salatul Layl is able to do that for one person, or even if one instance of israf anywhere in the world does it for one person, it causes them to be poor, then that's it, the sentence is correct. Okay, logically the sentence is correct. That's a logical way of doing it. Okay, but someone may say, well, look, man, this is way too technical. Like, yeah, it may be correct in the science of discipline of logic when you want to use these propositions for philosophy, let's say. But this is not how humans speak at all. Like, that's not, when they say sabab al-faqr al-israf, did it really just mean like one instance of israf? Anyone that happens to become poor with it, then that's it. Like this, this is what the sentence meant. It's kind of very difficult to digest that. A second way is how some of the usuliyin have said, which they say when you have this very absolute word, like sababul faqr al-israf. What type of israf? Any israf. It doesn't say that means it's mutlaq, it's absolute. Or salatul layl, brightens your face. Which type of salatul layl? Salatul layl, every salatul layl. The usuliyin have said that in this case, you take the most severe instance of that word. So, for example, when you say sababul faqr al-israf, israf is the cause of poverty. The most severe case of israf will result in poverty. Okay, someone who just like spends everything, for example, even though he doesn't have it. Or salatul layl, the most spiritual salatul layl that someone could have performed. That's the one that's gonna, the moment you do it, that's it. Your face will become brightened. Okay, the highest degree of salatul layl that someone can perform, that instance of salatul layl or that instance of israf is going to cause these things. Okay, in that case, even like one instance of it, they believe this can happen. Once again, you can say, is that really what Imam Ali and Imam Sadiq alayhi wassalam, is that what they meant? Like, is that how people speak? It's kind of, might be difficult to digest as well. Another way to look at it is that these sentences, okay, if you look at it, there's a causal relationship between them, right? Like it says the cause of faqr is israf. The cause of the brightening of your face is salatul layl. So someone can say that, look, this cause and effect, this causal relationship, it's true. It is how it is. It is how this narration is saying it. But it's under the pretext that all things are equal. Meaning what? If all things are equal, israf will result in faqr. If all things are equal, salatul layl will result in the brightening of your face. But the problem is, all things are not always equal. Okay, our salatul layl is not a salatul layl which does not have any other variables involved. For example, what our attention is maybe, we may not be very attentive to it. Or israf, like, I don't know, like the situation of israf is that such that, we gave it, but somebody gave us like some aid or some money like right after that. And, okay, because basically for a cause to have, for a cause to be effective, there cannot be any barriers. Let me give you an example. What I'm trying to say over here. Look, the cause of fire. If you have a matchstick, the moment you rub it or scratch it, it's gonna burn. Okay, that's the cause of the fire. The moment you sort of whatever you rub it or scratch it, it should cause the matchstick to burn. It's a causal relationship. But we say this is only when all things are equal. But if there are certain barriers, like let's say the matchstick is wet, let's say there's no oxygen where you are, let's say the stick is broken, or that thing that they scratched the matchstick on, I forgot what it's called, that is like ruined or something, then no matter how many times you scratch that matchstick, it's not going to burn. Simple as that. That doesn't mean that's not a cause and effect. It was a cause and effect relationship, but there's barriers now that are preventing from that matchstick to burn. That's what they're trying to say over here. That yes, israf is a cause of faqr. But if all things are equal, but all things may not be equal for many people. That's another way of looking at it. So once again, that's a very sort of, almost like a philosophical way, bringing in this idea of Aristotelian cause and effect. It's coming from Aristotelian ideas of, causal relationships. You may wonder, like, which Arab of that time was thinking like that when he understood this, or she understood this. Finally, second last, someone may say that these are not universal statements to begin with. Who said they're universal? Urf, when they say these type of sentences, they usually just mean most instances. Sababul faqr al-israf. Israf causes poverty. What they mean is like most cases of israf cause that. Not that every single instance, the moment someone does israf, then that's it. Like it's gonna cause them to become poor. They can say Urf does not speak like that. Okay, Urf doesn't speak like that. Urf speaks in this way, but it usually means aghlabiyya, ghaliban, it's like this. In many cases, it's like this. And one last way to look at it is once again through gradation and continuity. Meaning what? Meaning that, look, what they mean here, the sentence means is that al-israf, when you are, adamant and consistent with it, over time, it will make you poor. Okay? Sababul faqr al-israf, meaning al-israf, not just one instance, but regular cases of it. If you, do israf a lot, and that's what you do in your life, it's going to end up making you poor. Likewise, salatul layl, not just one instance, but no, regular salatul layl. If you keep praying salatul layl regularly, then eventually, this effect will take place. That's, someone may say, well, this is what urf really means when they say these type of things. So over here, before I go to the third case study, I just want to make one point that's just coming to my mind right now, is that one of the most important discussions in the last century, it has become one of the most discussions, is the language of religion. By the way, this is like an interjection. It was not part of my my presentation, but I'm just throwing it out. It's the it's the nature of the language of the Quran and the riwayat. Okay, what is the type of language? Yeah, we know it's Arabic, but how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking with us? How is the Prophet and the Imams, how are they speaking with us? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking with us as a philosopher? Okay, in the Quran I'm speaking about. Is he speaking as a philosopher? Is he speaking as a logician, as a mathematician, as a scientist, as a master who has a slave master relationship, or as how the Urf spoke at that time, the Arabs? How did the Arabs speak? Did the Arabic language in the time of Jahiliyyah, was it a philosophical language? Was it even a fiqhi language? The fiqh that developed 100 years after, 150 years after in Kufa and Baghdad and these places. Was that, was that the nature of their language? Many scholars will say that no, it was none of these. Their language was urfi, how the urf spoke. Okay, and it's not that if the language was not philosophical, that they were not precise with their meanings. No. When urf wants to be precise, they have their own way of being precise. Okay. Yes, a mathematician may have a different way of being precise, but urf can also be precise. How can urf be precise? Urf is precise by their linguistic complications. For example, They will use metaphors and figurative language and hyperboles and rhetorical devices. That's how urf speaks, and that's how the urf conveys their meaning. So when we say the Quran is revealed in the language of the Quraysh or the dialect of the Quraysh, okay, what does that mean? It means that this is the convention that they would use, and that this is what they would speak in. And so the Quran has to be understood from this lens, primarily, fundamentally speaking. Likewise, when it comes to the Imams, when they speak, this is the qaida, this is the principle in Usul al-Fiqh. I think, maybe Wahid Bahbahani was the first one to write about it, like explicitly in the Shi'i Usul. As far as I haven't seen anyone before him. Maybe there is, but I haven't looked into it. Sometimes, sometimes someone may say, I haven't come across this before, or I haven't come across this hadith. The audience may think I've investigated, I've gone through 110 volumes of Bihar al-Anwar or something, and then I haven't come across it. No, it's not. I'm just saying I haven't come across it, meaning I haven't researched into it. But I know Wahid Bahbahani has a treatise on this, where he says the Imams, the principle is that they speak in the language of the urf. Okay, so we have to try our best to understand what the urf means from these type of statements, because the hadiths are snippets from conversations that were taking place. You got to understand, when Imam Ali is there sitting, saying the sentence Sabab al-Faqr al-Israf, or Imam Sadiq is saying, it's not that they're just walking down the street and Imam Sadiq just just walking in the bazaar and he's like, Salatul Layl tubayyidul wajh. It seems a little bit far-fetched, that's what was happening. No, it's probably some gathering. There's some companions, or Imam Ali may be giving a khutbah, for example, or a sermon, something like that. There's some context to it. They're not just robotic sentences. This is very important, guys, by the way. It may sound very common sense, but it's not. When we speak with the layman, I don't know how they interpret narration sometimes. It's just so, they stick onto a word so strictly, and they start to look at it from a very, very logical way. In the sense, by logical, I don't mean rational and illogical meaning irrational. No, in the way that the logicians have described certain principles, even though no one speaks like that. That's not how language works. So this is a point I really wanted to mention over here. Completely, not really, I wasn't part of my thing, but it's related to fiqh al-hadith. It's related to fiqh al-hadith. We'll do one last case study before I go through. I have the last couple of slides I've added, which are just books that I've come across, hadith books which have been translated into English. But let's do this last one. This one is interesting. So this is also now from a real example in fiqh. Does lying break your fast and wudu? So by lying, I mean, the famous ruling that some of the maraji have given, that if you attribute a lie to the Prophet or the Imams, your fast is broken, correct? That's a fatwa of many of the maraji. What's the evidence for it? So they have, some narrations for it. Three of them are this one as follow. Okay. And this is from Wasail al-Shia. Let's look at the first narration. It's from Abu Basir. And by the way, all three are reliable and authentic. Okay, so we're not looking at those. We're just looking at the content right now. Abu Basir quotes from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, Imam Sadiq says, Man kadhaba ala Allahi wa ala rasulihi wa huwa sa'im, naqada sawmahu wa wudu'ahu idha ta'ammad. Someone who attributes a lie upon Allah and His Messenger while he is fasting, he has broken his fast, and he has broken his wudu if he had done it intentionally. Okay, and the wudu. So this is where it's gonna become. Oh wait, I don't like right now. Has any faqih given a fatwa on this? That if you are in a state of wudu and you break your fast and you lie to Allah upon Allah, does your wudu break or not? No one has ever given a fatwa on this. But this is what the narration says. Okay, so let's look at the next one. The next one is also from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. The companion says, سألته عن رجل كذب في رمضان. He says, I asked the Imam about a man who lies in the month of Ramadan, and the Imam says, قد أفطر وعليه قضاء. He has broken his fast and he has to do the qada. So I asked him, what is the nature of what type of lie does it have to be? And the Imam says it has to be a lie upon Allah and His Messenger, meaning someone who lies, and misattributes something, attributes something incorrectly to Allah and His Messenger while they are fasting, the fast is invalid. This is the ruling that we know of. Okay, this is the hadith, like we know this ruling. It's like, okay, yeah, cool, that's fine. But now look at the next narration, and also look at the chain. The second one said Uthman bin Isa an Sama'a. The third one also says Uthman bin Isa an Sama'a. Okay? And look at how the content begins. It's very similar to the second one. The second and third are very similar. سألته عن رجل كذب في شهر رمضان. Same as the second one. فقال قد أفطر وعليه قضاء. Second one also says the same thing. Right? قد أفطر وعليه قضاء. It's the same thing. But look at this addition in the third one. وهو صائم يقضي صومه ووضوءه إذا تعمد. Okay? And he is someone who has to do the qada of his fast and his wudu. So, okay, now what's going on? We have, if you look at it from a bird's eye view, you're going to realize there's two narrations which actually say that the wudu is also broken technically. You have to do the qada of the wudu as well. You have to redo the wudu. But now let's investigate this. Okay, this is where everything has to come into play. We want to say one thing first. First thing we have in mind as a faqih, he's gonna know that no one in the history of our fiqh has ever said that if you lie while you have wudu, your wudu is broken. No one has said that. Okay, so that's already a huge thing for a faqih. Like, okay, wait, and they also know that the fuqaha have seen these narrations. They know that, and the narrations are authentic. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do over here? Then a second step, we're gonna say this hadith number 2 and hadith number 3, they're most likely the same narration. Okay, it's probably the same narration. It's not that Sama'a was the narrator. He went to Imam Sadiq 2 different times and he said the same thing. Sa'altu an rajulin kadhaba fi shahri Ramadan, and the Imam said the same. It's most likely one incident. Okay, most likely one incident, and he asked, and then he went and he transmitted it to Uthman bin Isa, and Uthman bin Isa then gave it to these 2 other narrators, individuals, right? Ali bin Mahziyar and Hussein bin Sa'id. Okay. Look at how Sayyid Shubayri Zanjani in his Bahs Kharij, this is how he explains it. And by the way, like Ayatollah Shubayri Zanjani is someone who is an expert in manuscript studies, and he's worked on the manuscripts of like Usul al-Kafi and different books. So look, the more skill set you're gonna have, the more practice you're gonna have, you're gonna come up with this solution. If someone like me, miskeen, if I were to read it, I'd be stuck on this forever. Like I wouldn't know what to do, right? Because I don't have any experience with manuscripts, the original manuscripts of the books. Okay, all I have is my software. I open my software and that's it. Like my software tells me this is what it told me. So what do I do? I'm stuck. Look at how Sayyid Zanjani explains it. He says, look, the third narration, which says, the last red line, which says, وَهُوَ صَائِمٌ يَقْضِي صَوْمَهُ وَوُضُوءَهُ إِذَا تَعَمَّدْ. He says this is the same line as the one in the first narration. Okay? Look at the first narration, guys. وَهُوَ صَائِمٌ نَقَضَ صَوْمَهُ وَوُضُوءَهُ. So that's the only difference. The first one says نَقَضَ. This one says يَقْضِي. It means 2 different things. نَقَضَ means he broke his fast, which is the first hadith. Third one says يَقْضِي, meaning he has to do the qada. Okay, but we're not done. We'll get to that as well. The first thing we want to show is that the first and the third, this last section of it is the same. Okay, except that one word. Sayyid Zanjani then goes on to say that because of my experience dealing with manuscripts, I can tell you that there's a scribal error which is widespread in the books of hadith, which is between naqada and qada. Okay, naqada and qada yaqdi. This is subject to scribal errors like crazy. Okay, And he says this yaqdi, which is mentioned in the third narration, is a scribal error for naqada. Okay, it's not meant to be yaqdi, it's meant to be naqada. Okay, but that still doesn't explain this last red line in the third narration. He says a scribe made a mistake and he accidentally brought that part of the narration from the first hadith into this third one. He made a mistake. Okay, he said he made a mistake. And what is his further evidence for that? He says my further evidence for that is that Sama'a is asking him about the Shahri Ramadan, the Sawm fi Shahri Ramadan, and the Imam gives him the answer, قَدْ أَفْطَرَ وَعَلَيْهِ قَضَاهُ. Why is he talking about يَقْضِي صَوْمَهُ وَوُضُوَهُ إِذَا تَعَمَّدَ? The Sama'a never asked about the wudu. Okay, this is just like a further evidence that he's bringing over here. So his conclusion ends up being that the first narration is correct the way it is. The second is also correct the way it is. The third one has an addition, which was a mistake made by one of the scribes, and he accidentally added that line into the third one, and that's how it got copied into the manuscripts, and then that's how it got copied into the later books. Okay, but you may still be asking, well, okay, let's just say that's even true, but what do we do with the first one? You said the first hadith is also authentic. At that time, we go into this whole discussion that, okay, well, because no one has given a fatwa on that one, and it's only one narration that says this, our itminan, our conviction in it becomes so weak that we no longer have trust and conviction that this can be truly attributed to the Imam. Okay, and once your conviction becomes weak, then that's it. You're not going to give a fatwa. You're not going to give a fatwa off of that. That's how eventually they will get to that stage of that discussion. But that's not our point here. My point here was to show how these type of things can happen in narrations, and you have to be watchful for at all times. All this mixture, and describe making a mistake over here, he's putting this line, and the stronger you are, the easier it will be for you to catch these things out. Correct? So as I said, these are, and by the way, for a lay person, they may be thinking like, oh my God, if this is the case, like this is just a mess. If all these mistakes can happen. Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the point of a faqih. That's the point of a mujtahid. Like, they go and they investigate. That's why they're investigating these things, and they end up figuring these things out after a lot of work and experience in the field. So these are the 3 case studies I wanted to do. I don't know how clear the third one was. Maybe you got a little bit technical. I don't know, but maybe if you listen to it again, it'll become clear again. What I want to do in the last 2 slides, I'm done. Like my discussion is actually done, but this is a list of these 2 slides that I have here. Is a list of all the books of ahadith that have ahadith in them that have been translated into English. Now, I've just mentioned all the ones that I've come across, and it doesn't mean that all the translations are very good, or some of them may actually be pretty weak. I intentionally didn't mention some of the books that I also know are in English. Basair al-Darajat, for example, and some of these books are also in English, but because I know the translation was really, really bad, so I did not mention that. These ones are, sufficient and decent enough. So I've written these ones over here. So what's out there in the English world? You have Usul al-Kafi by Sheikh Khulaini. It's completely translated. Okay, you can Google it online. You'll find by Muhammad Sarwar has translation. Sheikh Rizwan Arastu has, I think, the first 3 babs are translated of the first volume. There's this very old translation by, I think, World Federation or someone. I don't know who translated that one, but there's a very old version of the first 2 volumes that's also translated. As I said, if you Google these, you'll find them. Obviously, Nahj al-Balagha is translated. Tuhf al-Uqul is translated. Mizan al-Hikmah by Ayatollah Rayshari is translated. These you can find on Al-Islam that I've written. Al-Khisal of Sheikh Saduq. Ghurar al-Hikam. Al-Amali of Sheikh Mufid is translated. Kitab al-Ghayba of Sheikh Nu'mani. Sheikh Nu'mani was writing this Kitab al-Ghayba around 30, 40 years after the beginning of the major occultation, Al-Ghaybat al-Kubra. He was writing this book at that time. So one of the earliest books we have on the Ghayba, in the beginning of the Ghayba. Kitab al-Irshad is translated, Uyun al-Akhbar is translated, Mishkat al-Anwar of Alama Tabrisi is translated, Kamil al-Ziyarat is translated, Fadail al-Shia, Kamal al-Din. Kamal al-Din is also a Kitab al-Ghayba, basically, of Sheikh Saduq. This was also written around, first, 80 years or something, or 50 years right after the Ghaybat Kubra. So very early, these are very early books. Haqqul Yaqeen is translated, Hayatul Qulub, these are by Alama Majlisi. Kitab Sulaym bin Qais is also, I think it has 2-3 translations. Kitab al-Ghayba of Sheikh Tusi is translated, and I believe I saw it in the volume 13 of Bihar al-Anwar, which is translated by Ansariyan, published by Ansariyan. So that one was there. Sunan al-Nabi by Alama Tabatabai. Munyatul Murid, which has recently been translated as Desire of the Aspirant, published by ICAS, translated by Brother Alexander Khalili, if I recall correctly. Heart Comforter by Shahid Thani, which he wrote, I think, after his own son passed away. He wrote Musakkinul Fuad is basically the Arabic. He wrote this book. It's basically a book talking about, how to deal with calamities and hardships. Combat with the Self, that's translated, and this is basically a translation of one of the sections of Wasail al-Shia, Nahj al-Fasaha, and also Ithbat al-Raja by Fadl bin Shadhan. Although Ithbat al-Raja, it's not proven to be from Fadl bin Shadhan. There's a lot of problems with that attribution to him. But if you look at it, there's a lot of material actually online that you can find. Like a lot of Hadith books are translated, from these 3rd and 4th centuries. So it's not that we don't have anything. Some people are still insistent that, we need to translate our books. Actually, quite a few of them are translated already. We don't, I think maybe some people are interested in translating some of the fiqh narrations. I don't agree with that too much because, it really is pretty irrelevant for most people to be going through the fiqh narrations. But some of these akhlaqi ones, some of the ones on history and just generic narrations like Al-Kafi, the first 2 volumes is good. Mizan al-Hikmah is all good. Al-Khisal, these type of books, they're good. They're good to go through just so you can get an idea of like what is actually, in the riwayat, in the narrations. And then you can also sometimes judge for yourself. Like when someone comes and gives an interpretation, if you have a decent reading in the riwayat, you can yourself, ask them, like, look, this is what I read. This is what I understood. How did you derive this meaning from these narrations? Or what narration were you using? That can equip you. It can equip, the more you read, it can equip you to be able to do that, So this is all I had from my side for these 4 sessions. Once again, I want to thank you guys for organizing this. Apologies, if there were any shortcomings on my side, as I already, gave a disclaimer, I guess, multiple times that, this wasn't going to be a very extensive and, in-depth course. Obviously not. Like it's not worth it. It's more introduction and a primer on what is out there, what are the different discussions, and I hope, inshallah, that this was sufficient for the audiences. So that's all I have. If there's any questions for this last session, please feel free to ask me, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah, brother. Jazakallah khair. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant your daughter speedy recovery. I hope she's feeling better, and inshallah she feels better soon. We don't have a lot of questions. We only have 2 questions, and the 3rd question was about the bibliography. So thank you for going through that. The first question we have is, since we're going through some hadiths, what is the authenticity of the hadith اختلاف أمتي رحمة, and how do we understand this hadith?
I mean, look, I would have to, I don't know the authenticity. I haven't looked into the authenticity of it, but I mean, obviously the as far as the interpretation is concerned, we have the 2 famous interpretations. One which says that ikhtilaf over here means difference of opinion, and another one that says no, ikhtilaf over here means the meeting of one another, like the believers and the community, like having a close relationship with one another, meeting one another. Once again, this is a fiqh al-hadith discussion. Like, what does the word al-ikhtilaf mean? Did al-ikhtilaf mean difference of opinion in the time of the Prophet? Is that what the Arabic word generally meant? Or don't have ikhtilaf with one another. Is that what they meant? Is that how they even used it? Someone would have to go and investigate the usage of the word in the early hadiths. You would even have to look at the Sunni hadiths over here, by the way, to figure this out. And then come and say, well, ikhtilaf over here means, for example, the greeting of one another, meeting of one another, visiting each other's houses, as opposed to saying al-ikhtilaf over here means a difference of opinion. Now, as I said, I don't have like an answer on this. I'm just saying that these are the two interpretations that I have heard. As far as the authenticity, I don't know. I don't recall. I haven't looked into it. So, it could also mean al-ikhtilaf in the sense of difference of opinion, but then you would have to ask, to what extent? Yeah, to what extent is this ikhtilaf ar-rahma? Like, is it always a rahma? Sometimes we see some pretty brutal things happening when the ikhtilaf happens. What about the ikhtilaf that happened after the Prophet? Ikhtilaf in the meaning that we're using today, like differences of opinion. You had differences of opinion between Amir al-Mu'minin and the Khulafa, for example. Is that a rahma? The ikhtilaf that happened at the time of the Khawarij or Muawiyah, and all these ikhtilafat, these are all ikhtilafat. So what? Like, that's also rahma? You get what I'm trying to say? Like, you would have to be prepared to answer those questions as well if you decide to say that this means differences of opinions.
Thank you. And the final question is, and we briefly discussed this question during our Quran series as well. Some Muslims, and especially those in the West, have become somewhat cynical towards the Hadith literature. Like one example is the Quranists, and sometimes their sentiments are somewhat valid, because history is not objective, and it's usually a product of the author's current events of day, time, culture, gender, and race. Do we need more diversity in terms of our scholars, is the first question. And the second question is, does the text consider traditionally marginalized populations?
So look, see, the Quranist movement, I think it's always good to see how the movement even began to begin with. Yeah. It's not as simple as they didn't just say, oh, the hadiths are weak and then we don't trust it anymore. That's not how it began. And even in contemporary Western academia, like they don't do that anymore. There was a time the German school and some Orientalists, like that's what they said. They said these are all fabrications and back projections by the Muslims. I'm saying that's even they don't say that anymore. This idea was critiqued even in the Western academia. Likewise, the Quranist movement, when it began, like it was a very like a reactionary movement that came and interestingly, it came from Hind. It came from India. Sorry, this movement began in India. It was more to do. Yeah, it was more to do with this understanding, this fiqh al-hadith that I'm speaking about. They weren't able to, make sense of certain narrations as the modern world was changing, basically. Okay. And because of that, they're like, what? This seems like it's just a joke. Like that's the reaction that they had. This is just a joke. And then eventually they went into the discussion of the Hoji of the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet. That was their real concern. Because look, what does the Hadith do? Hadith is literally us following the Sunnah of the Prophet. That's what it's actually all about. Okay. What did they do? They went into a theological discussion and said the Sunnah is not even Hujjah. They said, who said you have to follow the Sunnah? That's how they came and decided to then say that the Hadiths are totally, not required. Because look, it's very difficult. If you become a skeptic in the sense that you don't even accept any narration, okay, which is such a huge corpus, and the Muslim world did a very good job. If you look at it compared to previous civilizations and previous generations, it's unmatched what the Muslims did. Okay, if you become a skeptic towards all of it, then you can actually take that argument. If you want to be consistent, then you can even take that argument back to the Quran. Okay, because at the end of the day, the Quran was compiled by the companions then. Okay, the Uthmanic Codex, he burnt all the previous masahif of Ibn Mas'ud and Ubay and so on. I'm saying you can open up all these questions to them if according to their criteria. I'm saying, okay, we're trying to say like the criteria is wrong. Like, why do you have to say all the hadiths are we're not going to accept it? What kind of criteria is that? Do you do that for all of history? Do you do that for other reports? In terms of the Shi'i scholars who have discussed and critiqued the Quranists that I know of, there are other scholars, but the one I am familiar with is my own teacher, Sheikh Haydar Hubbullah, in his Hujjiyat Sunnah, where he has a lengthy critique on the Quranists. Okay, lengthy critique, because the Quranists will come and say stuff like Quran tibyanun li kulli shay. Okay, it's tibyan for everything. So why do you need the Sunnah? These type of arguments that they have used over the last century. He's gone through every single one of them and he's critiqued every single one of them. And he's also proven the general reliability of the Hadith and the Sunnah. As I said, this discussion isn't necessarily just about the Hadith. It's actually about the Sunnah. They're trying to say we don't want to accept the Sunnah. It's not Hujjah. Okay, so that's how the argument goes for the Quranist. And as far as the other thing, I didn't understand the question about the marginalized. I didn't understand that.
So the first one is, do we need more diversity in terms of our scholars? So for example, most of our scholars have traditionally been from the East, and they have traditionally been men. So does the text consider, do we have enough text that covers or is relevant to traditionally marginalized populations? So
you mean the Hadith? You mean the Hadiths themselves?
Yeah.
So look,
sorry, that's the second question, the actual Hadiths themselves. And the first one is in terms of like our actual scholars interpreting the Hadiths through the same lens.
Yeah. Oh, okay, I get what you're saying. So at this point, when you go to Qom or even if you go to Najaf, obviously we have scholars and students who are not just from the East, they're from other parts of the world as well. A lot of Western students are there. But look, it's not just I don't believe it's just about being from the East or West. At the end of the day, if you're trying to understand the meaning of the verse or the Hadith, and you cannot superimpose your own worldview and your own experiences onto the narration. You have to try to make sure that you don't do that. Yes, will some of it happen? Definitely is going to happen. It's almost impossible to escape and sort of not bring in any presumptions. No, you're going to end up bringing some presumptions. Some presumptions are actually required for you to bring into the Hadith. But I don't believe just being from the West, if you look at the narrations, you're going to come up with some very twisted ideas and very different ideas. No, because I want to mention something here. When I did AhlulBayt, I still remember, and maybe if my classmates listen, they may remember this too. The first day of AhlulBayt, our teacher came and he said, this teacher was a bit of a comedian as well. And he says, from day one, all the maraji today, when they entered the hawza, their mission and their goal was to become jahil. And, there was this awkward silence in class, looking around, what do you mean? The maraji, they want to become jahil, want to become ignorant. And the teacher started laughing. He's like, no, what I mean is that they want to become like the jahil Arabs of the time of the Jahiliyyah. Because it's only after you become aware of their context that you're going to understand the beauty and the depth and the meanings of the Quran and the Hadith. And that's pretty much our goal in the Hawza. You become jahil in the sense that you learn the conventions of the Arabic language of that time. That's because that's the language that the Quran was being revealed in, correct? Or the Hadith as well in later time. So I'm saying, look, I don't think just being from the West and reading a Hadith should impact significantly what the Hadith actually means. I don't believe that should even happen, because the conventions are not changing. It's the same Arabic language, unless you believe and you come up with some ideas or some theory which says that this narration can have multiple meanings, as ideas of butun and so on, the esoteric meaning. Unless you prove those and those are established, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying fundamentally that's not the case. Okay. And as far as the communities are the hadiths themselves, do they speak about, or do they concern us with basically the world outside of where they were speaking of? I think that's probably what you mean. Like when the imam is speaking to someone, he's speaking to an Arab or speaking to a Persian most of the times. How does that make it relevant for us, today, for example? See, we have certain theological principles here by which we can overcome this issue. We have a very important principle in Aqidah, which says Qaidatul Ishtirak. Qaidatul Ishtirak says that, so let's say there's a narration which says that a Bedouin came to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and he asks the Prophet, what do I do? I don't know, how do I pray when I'm traveling? Okay, and the Hadith says a Bedouin came. And the Prophet says, when you are traveling, do qasr, for example, break your salah, something like that. Do we say that because the Hadith says Bedouin, this narration, this hukam is only for a Bedouin now? Do we say that? We don't say that. We nullify any relevance to the word Bedouin, which is mentioned in the Hadith. Why? Because of this qaida, which says Qaidatul Ishtirak. There's ishtirak, meaning like there's equality over here for this hukam between all Muslims. Between all Muslims, it's not restricted to a Bedouin. Likewise, we have many narrations which say the guy comes and asks the imams, like, there's a rajul who does so and so. What is his ruling? The imam says he should do this. The word rajul has no relevance in most of the rulings. It's just because of this qaidatul ishtirak. To say it's not just if a guy comes to the imam and he says there is a rajul who has a doubt between the second and the third rakat, like what does he do in salat? Imam says this is what he has to do. Okay, repeat his prayers or whatever. No faqih will say, well, this is just for a man. Like, this ruling is just for a man, it's not for a woman, because the hadith says rajul. So we have this. So I'm saying, look, yes, the narrations were being said to individuals who were, let's say, Arabs, or they were Persians, later on. That itself doesn't really mean much. Like that's not a barrier necessarily speaking for us to extract from that narration and then implement it in our day-to-day life. Yes, knowing their context, knowing the fact that this guy was a Persian, or knowing the fact this guy was an Arab, historically speaking, can help us better understand that narration, and it can help us better extract what the hadith is trying to say, what is the gist of it, what is the core of it, and then apply it in our times. But just the mere fact that it was limited to these certain communities is not a barrier for us. Theologically speaking, it's not a barrier for us, basically.
What about the actual interpreters of the hadith not being so diverse?
So look, but like I would say they were pretty diverse. Like diverse in what sense? Like in terms of ethnicity, do you mean, or do you mean?
Yeah, like in terms of ethnicity, culture, gender, and race. Yeah.
So look, as I said, like there may not be much diversity there, but there was diversity from other perspectives. For example, not everybody was rich. Some people were poor. Some people were rich. Some people had different professions. Some people had different, affinities. Some people were converts. Like you definitely had this diversity. Some people were freed slaves, for example. Some people were slaves. Like there's all of this diversity that exists, correct?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say here is that even with this diversity that exists, okay, which is not a simple diversity, like having a different profession or being rich or poor, it has impacts in society, correct? I'm saying how much of that diversity really impacted like the fiqh, for example, or the kalam, aqidah that we have. How much does it really impact it? Likewise, I'm trying to say here is that let's say you're a Persian, or let's say you're an Arab, but the imam is speaking Arabic with you and he's telling you that, God has certain qualities. I'm saying, what role does your ethnicity really play in interpreting that narration? Yes, when it comes to fiqh, I'll give it to you. Yeah, there, because of certain experiences, certain context, definitely there was some level of interpretation happening. I'm not gonna deny that. But I just don't feel it was so exaggerated that as some people make it seem to be, like, because I think if that was the case, you would definitely have seen really, really different diverse interpretations of fiqh. Number one being fiqh, okay? Because fiqh is what your practical life is about. And if you have people in Khurasan and you have people in Baghdad and Medina and Qom, and if their geographies and their cities had such an impact as the claim is being made, you would have had very significantly different looking fiqhs. Okay, and I'm saying we are not seeing that. I'm not seeing that. Like, it's pretty consistent. Yeah, of course, as I said, there were different trends of the Sahaba, of the Imam, and so on. Definitely, we had that. As I said, I'm not denying that. Absolutely. As I'm saying, I'm trying to question the significance of it, or is it really as bad or exaggerated as some people may seem to show it as? That's what I'm trying to question, basically.
That was our final question. Thank you for answering the question. Do you have any final sentiments before the end of
No,
today's
I just want to say thank you to yourself and also any other organizers that have taken the time out to organize this, and also to the the university student group. I hope it was beneficial, inshallah, and anything else in the future, if anything else I can be helpful with, I'll be definitely be able to present or anything like that, inshallah. But no, that's all I had to say. Once again, thank you for having me and showing me the respect to host me, inshallah. Alhamdulillah.
Without a shadow of doubt, I can confirm to you that it's been very beneficial, especially to predominantly English-speaking viewers. And finally, I'd like to thank you on behalf of our viewers for gracing us for the past 4 weeks and sharing indispensable knowledge with us. We literally couldn't have a more worthy presenter present in the field. So may the merciful judge bless you and your family, and may he grant you the tawfiq to keep striving in this path. اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بنور الفهم. اللهم افتح علينا من أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا من خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.